Only the paranoid survive.
The life and death battles of global businesses, the fatal decisions, the risks taken, the mistakes made inside the boardroom.
We will make an absolute huge amount of money if we're right.
The highest of stakes.
It was a real threat for everyone.
Driven by innovation.
All I had was something that I knew was disruptive. It was viewed to be impossible.
Blinded by fear.
Let's ignore it, because we don't really know what to do with it.
Desperate times and desperate measures.
That was the day that I had to go.
Fateful consequences.
So my only question would have been why.
And the lessons learned.
The problem was they were wrong, and it costs everything.
We're taking more of them than ever. Photos. With a camera always at hand, why not? They're free and fun. Last year, we took a whopping 1 trillion photos, according to the latest research. They're emailed, shared, uploaded across the world in an instant. They are what you might call Kodak moments.
Prior to Kodak, of course, Kodak moments did not exist in popular imagination. Now everyone understands Kodak moments as the instant which you intuitively feel needs to be preserved on film.
Actually, it's 100 years of Kodak moments, because Kodak began 1880, and for the first time ever, people were able to take pictures without having to go to an art studio and get a painting made, or without having to go to a professional photographer and have like a daguerreotype or a plate made. And it really took photography and made it mobile.
Ooh, a Kodak moment is supposed to be a happy memory.
So much for the experts. What about the rest of us?
Oh, a Kodak moment is when you capture the moment of something very special that sends that picture home.
I don't know what a Kodak moment is.
I do not know what a Kodak moment is.
And what about these youngsters in a Singapore skate park? Do they know what a Kodak moment is?
I have no idea.
I don't know. No idea.
I've seen adverts on like TV and like on YouTube for like
photo system, new from Kodak.
It's baffling. Kodak, the company that pioneered photography for the masses and dominated the world of photos for a century, has all but vanished for many consumers. So just who is or was Kodak, and why has the Kodak moment all but disappeared? To understand just what happened, we have to travel back to ancient history, the early 1990s.
Kodacolor VR films, capturing America in all its glorious colors.
Back then, Kodak was the dominant force in photography. When you thought of photos, you thought of Kodak.
Kodak was one of the giants of its era. At its peak, Kodak controlled about 80% of the film market in the United States, which is the world's largest photography market. Its name was synonymous with photography.
But the world was moving fast. A technological revolution was sweeping across the globe and altering everything it touched. We were changing, out with the analog, in with the digital. In the midst of this massive and rapid shift stood Kodak. The company was huge. At its peak, it employed 145,000 people around the world, and its profits were counted in the billions. The company seemed indomitable.
It was the ultimate blue chip stock. It invested billions of dollars over the years in making the best possible photographic film, but the gross margin on film was close to 70%. So you can imagine the kind of market share and the kind of profitability that Kodak enjoyed for a very long time.
And what's more, the giant company, by then a century old, stood poised on the verge of an amazing breakthrough, ushering in the new digital age. And this man was at the forefront.
I joined Kodak in 1973, and at that time, Kodak was the place to work. It was like going to work at Apple, going to work at Google. The first camera that I worked on at Kodak as an engineer was part of the lunar landing program for the United States. And this camera actually went to the moon and took some of the first color shots of the moon landscape. But I was always interested in electronics my entire life. So when the technology started to come around, I started looking at how that applied to imaging. And that was my personal love, Kodak, and every time I had a chance to move my job further toward digital imaging, I would always take that job.
By the time he was a vice president in the imaging group at Kodak, Strickland led a team working on a radical new form of picture taking for the masses, the world's first consumer digital camera.
Digital imaging was a real excitement for me because it was viewed to be impossible. The first digital images were really ugly. I mean, you could barely make out a person's face. So it's just thinking, how can you, in a way that produces a business at a cost that can be afforded, combine all the technologies it takes to come up with images that can compete with photographic images? It seemed impossible to me. And the first digital camera that we made was for the professional market, and it cost like $30,000.
But technology was moving at breakneck speed. Image sensors, microprocessors, circuits, batteries, storage devices, all were getting smaller, better, and cheaper.
In 1991, a number of us had an idea about if we combine a number of these technologies at Kodak into a small package, we've got a digital camera. And we could see that in small-sized images, this camera would be good enough. And that's really what got me and a large part of my team interested in the idea that maybe there is really such a device as a consumer digital camera.
It would be like nothing Kodak had made before, a mass-market camera with no film.
Tonight, I'd like to show you one of the world's great cameras, the magnificent new Retina Reflex by Kodak.
Kodak's business model was essentially a classic razor and blade model, where you give away razors for free because you can make money by selling blades. Kodak never went into high-end still cameras. A cheap $5 camera uses the same film as an expensive $5,000 camera.
Almost no company can sell just cameras and make money. Because, of course, you buy one camera and you keep it for 25 years. And that has a very limited business model. But if you sell film and you sell processing, then you make much more money.
It's all about the film. Film had gross margins of 85%, 80%, huge.
Photographic film is at the heart of Kodak's DNA, its biggest innovation, and something which disrupted the existing world of photography. And it all took place in a town not far from New York.
I grew up near Rochester, and my grandfather worked for Kodak. He was an inventor, and pretty much my uncle also worked for Kodak. Everyone in Rochester works for Kodak, or did work for Kodak up until the 80s. So I was surrounded by Kodak my whole life.
And this is the original disruptor, George Eastman, the Eastman of Eastman Kodak, a brilliant inventor who changed photography forever. Before Eastman, photography was in the hands of the professionals. Eastman made photography mobile. No longer did you have to go to a professional's studio.
One of the interesting things about the invention, the innovation of the Kodak was to make it hand-holdable and to be able to carry your camera around with you, which made it easy to take on excursions and therefore easier to make memories with. Kodak further innovated in that direction by creating folding cameras that would go in your pocket. What you would do is you would be able to open this up when you wanted to take a photograph and use this little prism as a viewer where you'd be able to see or just range find, which means just point it in the general direction of something that you want to photograph and press the shutter. So when you finish with your Kodak, you would take all of the exposures and you would send the entire camera back to Kodak. And Kodak would, at the factory, they would process the film, put your negatives in sleeves, they would print them all, they would reload your camera, and they would send the whole thing back to you. And that's why George Eastman invented this slogan, you press the button, we do the rest.
Kodak's approach was revolutionary, but it was still a hard sell. It was, as corporate experts say, too disruptive. People needed persuading to break from the existing way of doing things, and Kodak came up with brilliant ways of making the pitch.
Kodak promoted this idea of capturing not only happiness, but youth and hipster, if you want to say. Sort of this quality of staying eternally young and freezing a moment of perfection. And they marketed through the idea of the perfect nuclear family and vacations, holidays. It is about that warm glow of people being away in the summer on the beach or having picnics, or in the winter having sledding parties, and that's what Kodak is all about. Sort of perfection, but an almost unachievable perfection.
Kodak's marketing was powerful and extensive. It slipped into the public's consciousness, changing behaviors, to the company's immense profit.
Kodak created the Kodak moment. They essentially gave you reasons to take pictures. The first thing that they did was they brought women into the fold. They created an advertising blitz which equated the idea of being a responsible housewife with somebody who keeps a meticulous record of her family's evolution and growth and records all the significant occasions in her family's life.
Surprise Charlie!
The Kodak Colorburst 250, the only instant camera with the built-in flash.
The other thing that Kodak did in terms of creating this Kodak moment was turning the idea of travel into that of vacation. With Kodak, this idea, which essentially said a holiday without a Kodak is a holiday wasted. Okay? If you've been somewhere and you don't have photos to show for it, you might as well have not gone.
And its reach extended far beyond snaps of families enjoying their holidays and of its fabled Super 8 home movies. During the 1950s, 60s, 70s and beyond, the company's pioneering technology allowed us to capture the world in extraordinary detail and clarity. And not just this world. Kodak's equipment gave us some of the great images of space and the heavens above, while its medical imaging allowed us to see deep into the workings of the human body. Underpinning everything Kodak did was consistency, global reach, the same products, the same quality, wherever you were.
Kodak played a huge role in photography because for any technology to be massively used around the world, you've got to have a platform. And the platform needs to have standards. So Kodak, by taking a platform and making everything low cost, but yet high quality, was able to drive the entire photographic industry at least for 120 years.
For Kodak, its very history and origins defined its enormous success. But as a secret project in Japan was about to reveal, Kodak's faith in film would prove too strong, and its eventual undoing. At the start of the 1990s, the giant American photography firm Kodak seemed invincible. For close to a century, its products and marketing made Kodak the dominant force in photography. If you thought of photos, you thought of Kodak. But everything was about to change. The digital and networked world was coming fast.
It's interesting that throughout human existence, we've always had change. But what's happening is the change is getting faster. And there are various estimates that the pace of change is doubling every 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And it varies from technology to technology.
And inside Kodak, there were some visionaries who could see ahead.
We could see the potential of a consumer digital camera, but there's one little problem that actually surfaced at lunch one day, where I was talking with a number of the executives in the consumer film business. And I just happened to say, oh, I think my group can pull together a digital camera that's good enough for consumer applications. And the looks that I got at that time and the silence that followed kind of led me to believe that maybe this is going to be an uphill battle.
But so radical was the project for Kodak, whose business was based on selling photographic film, that Strickland kept it away from his bosses. It was a stealth operation.
I realized that if I had developed that camera in Rochester, New York, which is where we did most of the development, it probably would have gotten killed. So I went over and talked to our chief technology officer, who was supportive of anything new. And I said, look, you've got a research laboratory in Yokohama, Japan. What if I fund this program and we do it over in your research laboratory? Nobody in Rochester will know about it because nobody goes to Yokohama. When they travel to Japan, they go to Tokyo.
So in the early 1990s, in a far-flung outpost of the Kodak empire, Strickland's team set up camp and were soon making excellent progress.
All was going just fine, and until late 1992, a VP of marketing happened to be taking a tour of Asia and just happened to have been taken to Yokohama. He just happened to go by the laboratory that was doing the camera, just happened to get a demonstration of it. And that meeting on Monday morning in Rochester with the executives began by him saying, before our president finished, he said, excuse me, does everybody know what Strickland's doing in Japan? And I kind of tried to look innocent as best I could. And he said, I had just been over there last week. He's developing a camera that doesn't take film. And he said, well, I saw some pictures on a computer screen and they look pretty good to me. And the body language in that room was one where I was thinking, I want to hide at this point in time.
Strickland, tipped as a possible future leader of Kodak, was ordered to give a detailed account of what he'd been up to the very next day.
I spent the night putting together a presentation, creating images, having a camera. And I give the presentation in about 45 minutes. And I look around the room, and the reaction ranged at worst from like darts and heads like this. No way, no F way are we going to do this. The most positive was, I don't get it.
It wasn't the first time that Kodak's bosses had missed the promise of digital imaging. As early as 1975, Kodak's researchers had pioneered the first digital camera.
This is one of the most amazing things. Kodak invented the first ever digital camera. So it wasn't invented by the people who then developed it into mass market, it was developed by Kodak.
When the inventors showed their new film-less photography to Kodak executives in 1976, they were puzzled and bemused. The company did file a patent, but then did nothing with the new technology. It simply set it aside. At that point, the digital future seemed very far away, and the Kodak executives returned to the business of selling film.
There's an interesting report where the response to the management, to the team that invented the first ever digital camera, was reported as being, "That's cute, but don't tell anyone."
By the time Don Strickland's secret consumer camera project was discovered, the world had moved on. Digital was gaining a rapid foothold everywhere, but the view inside Kodak hadn't changed, and it led to a difficult decision for him.
I actually lost sleep over the lack of support and also the negativity around people that did not understand and actively tried to sabotage digital photography. And I lost a lot of sleep trying to figure out what to do. You know, ultimately, I ended up leaving Kodak.
So what just happened? Maybe Kodak just asked the wrong questions.
Today, when people look back, they say, oh, Kodak executives were wrong. They were afraid of cannibalization. They were stupid or whatever. That's not the case. At that time, when I laid out the concepts for digital camera, I was asked very normal questions. How many units will we sell over the next 5 years? How profitable will the business be? These are all normal questions everybody gets asked to justify a business. The only problem was I couldn't answer any of them. All I had was something that I knew was disruptive.
For a company that was founded on disruptive technology itself, it seemed that Kodak had forgotten its roots.
That is symptomatic of an organisation that was built on innovation and has stopped listening to the innovators. There were a number of chances that Kodak had to A, see the signals from the market, B, listen to the innovators inside, C, listen to the innovators outside. But for some reason, they were utterly determined not to do so.
Strickland decided to move from Kodak to a struggling young company with a reputation for innovation and disruption. It was called Apple.
And they asked me different questions than the strategy questions at Kodak. At Apple, the question is really, what huge problem are you solving? What incredible value are you creating? And I could answer those. You know, digital and instant and the lack of chemicals and pollution, I could answer those easily.
Striking a licensing deal with Kodak, Strickland was allowed to bring his consumer camera technology with him to Apple.
So what I was in the fortunate position of was having developed the camera at Kodak. Kodak manufactured it and then sourced it to my group at Apple. And I launched it in early 1994 as the Apple QuickTake 100. This is the world's first consumer digital camera. It works like this.
So just what lay behind Kodak's baffling decision to block the world's first digital consumer camera, handing it and a possible future CEO into the lap of Apple?
If you look at incumbents in industries, they have resources and processes that are all vested in one direction, and then it's like trying to turn around the Titanic. And you think, okay, here's this little disruptive innovation. It doesn't fit with our gross margin. It's not enough business for us. Let's ignore it, because we don't really know what to do with it.
But ignoring it didn't mean it would go away.
Kodak was not paranoid enough. It should have been more afraid. I believe Andy Grove, who used to be the CEO of Intel, when he says only the paranoid survive. Okay? So you have to keep looking over your shoulder, what's coming, and preparing for that. Kodak was full of hubris because, and perhaps rightfully so, because they had created popular photography. They gave birth to popular photography. They were synonymous with popular photography. But they failed to break out of this world that they had created themselves.
That world was based on what Kodak executives called the silver halide strategy, named after the crucial components in photographic film. In short, it meant prolonging the use of film, and the companies seemed to do everything they could to put off the day of reckoning, trying an increasingly desperate range of hybrid technologies, such as photo CDs. Despite billions being spent, it wasn't working.
The last big failure that probably convinced everybody that there really is not a hope here was when Kodak, instead of going to the digital technologies, launched photo CD in 1992. It used digital technologies to give more utility to film. So you still used your film camera. Well, nobody wanted to do that.
When that didn't work, in another effort to prolong its film business, Kodak turned to the fast-growing Asian economies. It made a huge $1 billion bet on China, at the time one of the biggest ever investments in the country made by an American firm.
I think Kodak at that time was looking at the next big market, thinking we own almost 90% of the film market in the US. We need to look at where the next market is. It's China. And they could see a growing middle class that had the money to buy film and buy cheaper cameras, and it made sense. Thinking, let's take a successful business model and put it somewhere else.
But it would prove to be a hopelessly optimistic move.
Kodak made a number of assumptions, which was one, we have time. The developing markets will start with film before going to digital, and we will be there in China when that happens. So it was a set of assumptions around success. So far, we've always known what our customers wanted. We've always given them what they wanted. They didn't realize that consumers in China were going to leapfrog the whole film category and go straight to digital.
As the company stumbled, its competitors began booming. But Kodak wouldn't give up without a fight. In a letter to Kodak employees in 1997, the chief executive told staff, "Competitors are making bold claims. They claim they will dominate the future of this business. We speak for the tens of thousands of people who work for Kodak when we say, not on our watch." But despite its defiance, another trend was about to disrupt photography yet again and spell doom for Kodak. While Kodak was fighting a losing battle against a new form of photography, filmless digital snaps, another massive technological change was about to make that whole battle redundant. It was a technology that would sideswipe the firm and bring it to its knees. The new technology in question is probably in your pocket right now, the smartphone. Ironically, it was foretold by Kodak. But as with digital cameras, the opportunity was missed.
When I visited Kodak in 2000 or 2001, the person who was heading their digital imaging division was an extremely bright fellow and very experienced fellow. Asked me casually, what do you think of the idea if we put a camera in a phone? And at that time, no one had actually heard about that. So the idea in itself was a very clever idea, and it wasn't that Kodak was unaware of these developments in the market. It came back to creating the organizational platform from where such ideas could be turned into products with a complete strategy behind it to capture value from these ideas.
As sales of smartphones exceeded even the wildest forecasts of a few years previously, came not just new ways of communicating, but new ways of taking photos.
The phone was what I call the killer app, because to carry a separate camera is fine, and people do that. But once you put it in the phone that you always have with you, and once the image quality gets to be as good as you can get with a digital camera, and you have video, and you have instant sharing, you've got the killer app for imaging right there in that phone.
This has had a profound effect on the digital camera market. Smartphones had replaced dedicated cameras for many, but yet again, Kodak found itself left standing.
Kodak became so focused over time on its own product and its own business model that it lost sight of the wider changes that were taking place in the environment. Why people were taking pictures and what they were doing with that. So Kodak was all about, or Kodak's business model essentially was based on the notion of people taking pictures to preserve memories. People were no longer taking pictures to preserve memories. They were taking pictures to share them.
Everyone can now take photographs on their phone, and they keep those photographs on their computer. They often don't print them. There's no processing model left to be had. They share them immediately via digital technologies.
New billion-dollar firms have sprung up to help us share these snaps. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can share your photo with just one person or the world at the click of a button.
Everything was a Kodak moment now. There was no price or no cost associated with pressing the shutter. With smartphones, suddenly everyone was taking pictures.
For a business like Kodak, this was the death knell. Film isn't dead, of course, but today it's the province of enthusiasts. And where better than Singapore's Chinatown for avid snappers? For photographer Rachel Lim, it provides a rich canvas for her work.
I like the way film gives you lots of surprises. Sometimes, you're shooting stuff, you don't really think that shot's gonna work, and then when you look at your negatives, you go like, oh crap, that looks really nice. I didn't expect that to turn out that way. I love that element of surprise.
But even for someone passionate about film-based photography, she's not immune to the charms of modern technology.
Yeah, I use my smartphone. I use it for a lot of instances, like when I'm in a public place and I want to shoot a sneaky shot and I don't want people to notice me. It's those little moments that I keep spying for. And sometimes when I don't have my film camera with me, I just use my phone. It's quick, you just snap it out. I like instances where people are caught in the middle of doing something, when they are completely absorbed by whatever they're doing. They're lost in their own world.
For Rachel, however handy a smartphone is, nothing beats the qualities of old-fashioned photographic film.
It's all about the way each grain kind of interact with each other. I was really into the colours that Kodak film produced. It was rich, it was vibrant, it's more intensified than the way digital pictures turn out. So I felt quite sad in a way that, oh hey, my teacher said that Kodak's gonna go down and bust, and there I am falling in love with this film. That's not cool.
Rachel is one of the fans, but for most, film was abandoned rapidly in favour of digital snapping. The question remains why and how a company as wealthy and dominant as Kodak could misjudge the photographic world. Why didn't Kodak see this coming? Were its executives asleep at the wheel? Or was this something deeper?
Sure, it's Kodak.
Kodak managed to, over a period of years, demonstrate a warning signals. It's as if there were people running around the boardroom with bells and flashing lights on their heads, and nobody on the board could see it.
It comes down to what Kodak saw from Rochester, New York, or didn't see.
The problem is that all organisations have to look inside to make sure they do what they do as well as they can. They also need to look outside to see what's going on in the market, what competitors are doing and all the rest of it. As organisations become more powerful, more significant in terms of the fact that they are the precursor of that, they stop looking out. And that's when they start believing their own hype. They all say, well, we're number one, therefore we're safe. No, I'm sorry, the message is, if you're number one, the only way is down. And that's what happens.
It wasn't for lack of trying. Kodak spent billions attempting to make up the ground it was losing to competitors. As sales of smartphones rocketed and replaced much of the existing consumer camera market, Kodak was in serious trouble.
Kodak did miss the boat on smartphone technology. Kodak, of course, by that time, it was already in trouble. And as companies fall into trouble and their revenues are shrinking, they begin to panic. And by then, generally, it is too late for them to do anything.
By 2011, gripped by fear, the company embarked on a frenzied fire sale of its valuable intellectual property. A portfolio of patents valued at around $2.5 billion was put on the market. Nearly a year later, those 1,100 patents sold for just $525 million. By January 2012, the beleaguered giant faced the ignominy of a warning from the New York Stock Exchange. Its shares now trailed at under $1. Weeks later, on January the 19th, Kodak bowed to the inevitable and filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The impact on those who loved and worked at Kodak was huge. From 2003 onwards, Kodak closed down 13 plants and cut its workforce by 47,000. And that was before it filed for bankruptcy.
Kodak going into bankruptcy, I think, hurt everybody. And there were a lot of sad stories in that difference. Very sad, very personal stories. And also, anytime you see something that you've loved and you've worked hard at be destroyed, you can't help but feel, one, hurt and also a bit angry at that as well. The sad thing, when I look at it, is from 1983 until 30 years later when it went bankrupt, that's 30 years, the company spent $25 billion in R&D, about $25 billion. there wasn't one successful hit product in all that time. That's sadder than Kodak going bankrupt or getting acquired.
After losing the battle for digital photography to rival camera makers and then to a new generation of smartphone users, life would never be the same again for the once mighty Kodak. It was down, certainly, but maybe not quite out. Kodak went from being the world's leader in photography to being a broken company in little over a decade. The digital revolution that swept the world destroyed its valuable business of selling photographic film, once worth billions.
Not going digital hurt Kodak's photographic industry in a way that it was never going to recover from and never will recover from. It's impossible to say what's going to happen, but it is, of course, a tiny fraction of the company that it once was. And because it didn't throw all of its energy and weight behind digital imaging.
But the story for Kodak is far from over. It emerged from bankruptcy protection in 2013, albeit chastened and weakened. Today, the old Kodak has evolved into two distinct businesses. Eastman Kodak, which operates in delivering imaging innovations for businesses, and Kodak Alaris.
So Kodak Alaris is a new company. It started 2013. It came from Eastman Kodak. Today we have 3,500 employees across 34 countries. So the company in the last 2 years is growing, especially in Asia region.
Behind the new business are innovations developed at the old Kodak, such as scanning technologies. But perhaps of more value than this is the brand itself, one that continues to resonate.
So the Kodak brand for Kodak Alaris is a very important legacy that we care from the Kodak. Many customers relate Kodak as a good quality, innovation, and a trust brand.
It's all a far cry from the company's heyday. It was a catastrophic collapse. But could Kodak's bosses have done things differently? Put simply, was Kodak's decline inevitable?
My personal take on companies' lifetime is that the thing that kills companies is their own success, more than anything else, more than the competition.
For some, the fundamentals of business success are not units sold, profit margins and share prices. It's something far simpler and far harder to fix. It's psychology, it's people, it's attitude.
One of the things that is interesting is that people say that Kodak started getting like this when the digital age dawned. That's not actually true, because I think that Kodak started getting complacent even before then. If you look at what was happening maybe late 70s, early 80s in the film business, Kodak was getting to the point that it was complacent about its ability to control the whole global photographic world. For example, Fuji started making significant challenges to what Kodak was doing, and Kodak's responses were effectively to say, oh, well, it's only some Asian small competitor, you know, it's not significant, we're Kodak.
For many years, Japan's Fuji was Kodak's arch rival. Yet Fuji survived the advent of digital. Indeed, it's prospered. Today it's valued at around $19 billion US. So how did Fuji thrive while Kodak failed so spectacularly?
There are two different reactions to fear. There's the companies who start being concerned about the eroding of their existing revenue, of the inadequacy of their business model, and they do something about it, and often it's quite drastic. I mean, when we were talking about Fuji, Fuji had to make quite a drastic cut, and they react around this burning platform by saying, all right, we need to change.
One aspect is that Fuji diversified more effectively, moving into areas such as cosmetics and medical technology.
Just as human beings do. I mean, companies are made of human beings. And unless you get a CEO that is radical, and we were talking about Fuji and how the CEO came in and turned towards digital and turned towards cosmetics, did the opposite of his predecessor, which for a Japanese company and in Japanese culture was quite revolutionary and significant.
It also had a far looser corporate structure, which allowed each business to run independently.
Fuji did not follow a strategic process like Kodak and most Western companies did. They followed the Asian way of working on plans. So they would have a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan, which would just be reviewed constantly, continuously. And from that, they would go step by step, and when something didn't work, they would make adjustments. It didn't work, it would make adjustments. So they relentlessly kept moving their businesses to be more successful than they were. And the result is what you see today.
And then, of course, there's Apple, the company that took Kodak's unwanted consumer digital camera and made it a hit.
I think the comparison of Kodak and Apple is an interesting one, because Apple too realized in the early 1990s that it had essentially failed. By the late 1990s, Apple was very close to being bankrupt, because once again, it had become focused on its own product, which was computers. When Steve Jobs came back to Apple, Apple changed its name from Apple Computer Company to simply Apple Incorporated.
And what Steve Jobs did was to walk in the door and say, we are no longer a computer platform company. We have lost that battle, so just forget it. We're a consumer company, and I want to stop every single thing that's not aimed at consumers. People were astounded. That focus is what caused Apple to turn around.
They came out with the iPod, and later on they came out with the iPhone. So Apple moved away successfully from its existing business model, and Kodak simply failed to do that.
When Don Strickland took his digital camera to Apple, the company was on its knees. Yet today, Apple is the wealthiest company on earth. It demonstrates that to survive, you have to adapt.
There are people that say that, organisations have to fail at some point. I don't think that's true, because organisations constantly reinvent themselves if they have the ability so to do, to constantly keep changing how they supply the market. The critical thing is you're accepting that you're existing in a dynamic environment rather than a fixed environment.
The digital revolution was an epoch-making event in technology, and its impact has been far-reaching, altering the very ecosystem companies such as Kodak once thrived in. No business, it seems, can escape its environment. So, are there lessons here from the natural world for Kodak and others of how to cope with altered circumstances? Professor Antonio Monteiro at the National University of Singapore thinks there are some intriguing parallels between business and nature, and perhaps even something to be learnt.
Evolution is constantly happening, but you essentially have to keep evolving in order to keep alive. Organisms try to adapt to their environment, but environments change, and so sometimes populations cannot cope with environmental change. Businesses, I suspect, have the same type of lifespan. They compete with other companies. They try to sell as many products as they can, but eventually they may be overtaken by other businesses and they go extinct as well. So you have to keep evolving in order to actually keep the same and to keep alive.
While Kodak ultimately failed because it couldn't adjust quickly enough to a fast-changing world, the legacy of Kodak endures.
When you shoot it with digital, you have instant gratification, right? With film, there's more thought process. So it really depends on what the photographer is thinking and how he plans his steps. So yes, he only has 36 shots to capture. You work so hard, then you just get one good image. It's very different from digital. Digital photography is like, yeah, man, that's good, that's good, that's good. And then, you just move on and move on and move on. It's like you don't give any appreciation for like a good shot, but this one, it really pulls out the appreciation from you, And then you're like, yeah, this one picture rocks. It looks pretty nice. I wasn't expecting this to turn out this way, because this is one of like my older negatives that I never touched. I wondered how this would turn out actually for some strange reason. When you shoot it on film, it comes with a lot of memories. For example, it's like you shot it at that point of time in that day and how you were feeling and why you were there, who were you with, why do you purposely shot it in this way? And when you're developing it, right, it kind of like rushes back to you. So you feel nostalgic in a way, and I guess maybe that's what sums it up. Patience and nostalgia. I wish it wasn't me. I wish it was someone else that have to watch the fall of Kodak and not my time. They are one of the founding people of photography, and we owe a lot of our progress for what we're doing right now, even in digital cameras, because Kodak was part of that stamp line in the history of photography.
Maybe history will judge Kodak's bosses kindly. Few companies have lasted so long and achieved such success. It has left an indelible mark on how we capture special moments.
Kodak, of course, will never be the same again. Kodak was a veritable giant in the field. It shaped how we viewed the world. It shaped our habits in all kinds of different ways. And if it does survive, it'll survive in a more marginal role, and which will be a bit tragic for those of us, who grew up admiring this fascinating company.
Many people relate photographs with particular events they want to remember. And you still see the most photography going on at outings, births, marriages, these events that are very, very important. These kind of perfect moments that one wants to encapsulate. In some way, people are enacting the Kodak moment over and over again. They don't use Kodak anymore to do it, but Kodak survives in that legacy of the notion that what you're doing is freezing that perfect memory.